The conference room went quiet the second I set the folder on the table beside my mother's coffee cup. 11 years of silence. A law office on the third floor of a building in Cedar Falls, Iowa, with a view of a parking garage and rain running sideways across the glass. My parents on one side, my twin brother Caleb on the other. An estate attorney named Richard Fenn, who had been trying to manage the temperature of this meeting for 6 minutes and was failing. My mother had just finished telling the room that I had isolated our grandmother from her family, that I had showed up in her final years and turned her against her own son, that I was here to take what didn't belong to me. She said it in the soft, certain voice she uses when she has already decided how the story ends. Caleb studied his phone like it was the most interesting thing he had ever owned. My father's hand on the table was completely still, which was how I knew he was afraid. I opened the folder. What I pulled out of it is the reason I no longer have a relationship with my parents and will not for the foreseeable future. But to understand how I ended up sitting across a conference table from the people who raised me with a folder between us, you have to go back to the morning I came home from school to find a suitcase by the back door with my name on the tag. Welcome back to Sweet Payback Stories. If you have ever been told you were the one they could manage without, the spare, the overhead, the child not worth the full investment, this one is for you. No shouting, just the folder, the table, and the truth they spent 11 years betting I'd never find. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Subscribe, because this story doesn't end in that conference room. It ends on a back porch in the rain, and I want you to be there for it. Let me tell you who I am before they tell you for me. My name is Lena Grace Hartley. I am 31 years old. I own a small alterations and custom tailoring shop in Briar Falls, Wisconsin, population 6,000 and change. I make wedding dresses from scratch and take in the things people can't bear to throw away. A grandfather's suit that needs to fit a grandson, a mother's coat that needs a generation of its own. I work with my hands and I work with thread, and I believe in the specific dignity of making something last. I am precise. I have been precise since I was 8 years old, which is when I figured out that the world was kinder to people who didn't make mistakes, and I intended to be as unkind to the world as possible in return. My twin brother, Caleb, is 31, the same age as me, and has been smarter than me since the morning in first grade, when a teacher held up his worksheet and mine side by side to show the class the difference. She meant it as encouragement for him. She didn't think too hard about what it was for me. Caleb tested gifted at 7. I did not. From that morning forward, the architecture of our household reorganized itself around that fact, the way a plant reorganizes itself toward light. My parents, Robert and Linda Hartley, were not cruel people. I want to say that clearly, because cruelty is a simple thing, and what happened in our house was not simple. My father ran an insurance agency in Cedar Falls and thought about almost everything in terms of risk and return. My mother had a degree in secondary education and had stayed home with us and poured the career she didn't have into the career she planned to give Caleb. They were not bad people. They were people who made a decision and lived inside it so completely they lost the ability to see it from the outside. The decision was this: Caleb was the investment. I was the fixed cost. I heard it said exactly once, out loud. I was 10. I was supposed to be asleep, and I was lying in the dark hallway outside my parents' bedroom, with my ear to the 2-inch gap under the door, listening to them talk about money. My father said, "You can't stretch it to cover both of them fully. It's not possible with what we have. You pick the better odds and you put everything there." My mother said, "Lena would understand." I lay on that hallway floor and learned that understanding was the thing they needed from me, not love, not investment, not attention. Understanding, quiet accommodation, the graceful acceptance of being the less important version. I was 10. I went back to bed. I did not cry. I became, from that night forward, very good at not needing things. The suitcase appeared on a Tuesday in October when I was 13. I came home from school to find it at the back door, a brown canvas roller with my initials on the luggage tag in my mother's handwriting. My clothes were inside it. My books were in a cardboard box beside it. My mother was in the kitchen starting dinner, something with chicken that smelled like nothing was wrong. I asked what the suitcase was for. She turned from the stove and she had the look she used when she had already decided something and was managing the announcement. Measured, kind at the surface, she said my great-aunt Vera had a house outside Briar Falls and had been asking for company for years, and they thought it would be a wonderful experience for me. That Vera was 70 and practical and would be good for me. That I'd be starting at the school there after fall break. like?" I asked when I was coming home. My mother turned back to the stove. "We'll see how it goes," she said. I had heard that phrase in our house before. "We'll see" meant the decision had already been made. It meant the only thing that was actually flexible was how I handled the news. My father came home at 6. He carried my box to the car. He said, "Vera's a good woman. This is a good chance for you." He did not look at me when he said it. Caleb was at the kitchen table with his laptop and his headphones on and either genuinely didn't notice or had been told not to notice, and I have never been sure which. I want to tell you what I remember from that drive, because it will matter later. The way the radio played something I couldn't name. The way my mother sat in the passenger seat and watched the road and didn't turn around once. The way the October fields went flat and dark as the car left Cedar Falls behind. And the way I thought, very specifically, the thing you think when you are 13 and have not yet built the callus over the place something used to be. I must have done something. I had not done anything. That is the truth. I was a quiet girl who sewed things and read every book she could reach and had never once been sent to the principal's office. There was nothing wrong with me. There was only a spreadsheet, and I was the line on it that didn't pencil out. Vera's house was a white 2-story with green shutters and a vegetable garden that ran the entire length of the south fence. It smelled like cedar and old books and the specific warmth of a wood-burning stove in October. She was waiting on the porch when we pulled in, this small, straight-backed woman with grey hair cut short and hands that were already reaching for me before I was out of the car. She did not make it a production. She did not comment on my situation. She took my box from my father's hands without a word, walked it inside, and set it on the table in the room that was going to be mine. She said, "Dinner's at 6. I hope you like soup." She did not say "poor thing," or "we'll get you settled," or any of the phrases that are supposed to make an uprooted child feel better, but actually just make them feel observed. She gave me soup and a bed and a workroom with a sewing machine that had belonged to her own mother, and the following Monday, she drove me to Briar Falls Middle School and handed me a schedule and said, "The work will be there when you're ready for it." She was right. The work was always there. I learned tailoring from Vera the way you learn something when a person who loves it teaches you, not as a course of study, but as a way of moving through time. She taught me that fabric has a grain the way wood has a grain, and that cutting against it is the source of most disasters. She taught me that a good seam allowance was a form of trust. She taught me to press every seam before the next one, which she said was the tailoring version of honesty. She never once called my parents bad people. She never said a single ugly word about what they'd done, but she called me Lena Grace with both names the way you say something precious, and she never missed a school event, or a recital, or a thing I was involved in. Not once in the 4 years I lived with her before I left for the technical college program in Madison. When I went, she sent me with a sewing machine in a hard case and a card that said, "The world is full of things that need fixing. You were made for this work." I had never told her about the hallway, about the heating vent, about the suitcase with my initials on the tag. I didn't need to. She had watched my parents put a child in a car and drive away, and she had spent 4 years quietly telling me with every dinner and every pressing cloth and every early morning that she disagreed with their arithmetic. My parents called on holidays. Every Christmas and birthday a card with a $20 bill, my mother's handwriting, a brief note. Caleb's startup launched. Caleb's company raised a round. Caleb graduated early. Caleb reported to me in the same flat updates you'd give a colleague who'd changed departments. I didn't answer most of them, not out of rage, out of the same instinct that makes you stop watering a plant that has decided it doesn't need sun. Some things only survive in the direction of the warmth. Vera and I talked every Sunday. The calls ran 40 minutes. She wanted to know every detail of the shop I was building, and I wanted her to know. She was the only person in my life who had always wanted to know. Then one March morning, Vera didn't pick up on the first ring. She had always picked up on the first ring. The care home was 40 minutes from Briar Falls, a low brick building with a garden that somebody had planted carefully, and that Vera could see from her window on the east side. She had asked me not to make a fuss, which meant she had not told my father until the paperwork was already signed with the facility, because she knew he would consider himself entitled to opinions about it. She told me on a Sunday call in December, matter-of-factly, the way she said everything that required courage. She said she had a vascular condition, and that it was progressing, and that she'd rather be somewhere with reliable help than alone in the house worrying about both. I drove up every every other weekend. I drove up every other weekend for 19 months, which is to say I made every visit I could around the shop, while a woman, who had given me 4 years of dinner at 6 and sewing and soup, was alive enough to want company. My father called the care home twice in those 19 months. I know because Vera told me, and Vera noted things. She had a wooden box on the shelf above her small desk. Pale oak, a brass clasp, worn smooth at the corners from handling. I had noticed it the first time I visited and mentioned it once, and she had looked at it in the way she looked at things she was still deciding about. The second time I visited the following month, she called me over to the desk and put the box in my hands. She said, "There's something in here you need to know about before I'm gone. I've been trying to decide whether to tell you now or leave it for after. I've decided after is cowardly." I asked her what it was. She said, "Your grandmother Eleanor, your father's mother, left money for you. Specifically for you. When she died, you were 14 and living with me. The money was in a trust with explicit language. It was meant to cover your education, your start in life, not split yours." She looked at me. "Your father administered the trust," she said. "He was the named executor." She let me understand what that meant before she said anything else. "I suspected for years," she said. "I couldn't prove it. I was your great-aunt by marriage with no legal standing. But I kept what records I could, and I kept what your grandmother kept, and I put them in this box, because I didn't know what else to do with them except make sure someone with standing would find them." I held the box in my hands and felt the weight of it. "You have standing," she said. "You're an adult. You're the named beneficiary of a trust document that still exists, because trusts have to be filed. And there is more paperwork in the bottom of that box than your father ever expected me to collect." I asked her how she had gotten it. She smiled, the old woman's smile that means I was not always the person I appear to be now. She said, "Your grandmother and I wrote letters for 40 years. After she died, her attorney sent me copies of the trust because she had named me as an interested party. I asked for the disbursement records last spring. I told them I was a named party under the original document and I had reason to believe the records were incomplete. They sent them." A pause. "I was not always this quiet, Lena Grace. I was just waiting for the right moment to be loud." She pressed the box into my hands and asked me to open it alone, later, and to find an attorney before I did anything else. I drove home that evening with the box on the passenger seat and did not open it. I waited until I was sitting at my own work table under the good light I use for detail work, with a cup of tea and the specific kind of calm that only comes from having spent a full day doing something with your hands. Then I lifted the lid. Inside, letters, old correspondence in my grandmother Eleanor's handwriting, a copy of a trust document, the original filed with the Lynn County Probate Court, my name on it in black type, Lena Grace Hartley, sole beneficiary of the Eleanor Ruth Hartley Educational Trust. And underneath that, a manila envelope with the disbursement records from the trust's history. I set the trust document aside and I opened the envelope. I am a woman who works with thread and measurements. I understand precision. What the disbursement records showed me was the opposite of precision. It was the careful record of a decision made and executed across 4 years, starting the year after my grandmother died. Withdrawals from a trust with my name on it, tuition payments, fees, equipment, technology camp. The summer Caleb was 15, the private university where he did his undergraduate, all of it running through a trust that had been set aside for Lena Grace Hartley and redirected to the child my parents had decided to invest in. I am not a crier. Vera had said once that I kept my emotions where I kept my good thread, organized, out of sight, available when needed. That night, at my own work table, I used some of the good thread. I found Richard Fenn through a referral from a probate attorney in Madison, who had once helped me with the business paperwork for the shop. Richard was a quiet, careful man, with an office on the 3rd floor of a building in Cedar Falls and a reputation for handling family financial disputes without turning them into spectacle. I brought him the box on a Thursday morning in November. He went through it the way Vera had gone through everything, methodically, without reaction, taking notes in small tight handwriting on a yellow legal pad. When he finished, he set his pen down and looked at me over his glasses. He said, "The trust is still a matter of public record. The disbursements are documented. Your name is on this document as the sole intended beneficiary, and the funds were redirected without your knowledge or consent to a beneficiary not named in the original instrument. This is, at minimum, a civil matter. Depending on the specifics of how the executor acted, it could be more. He paused. I want to ask you something before we go further, he said. What do you want? I thought about it for a moment. I want to stop being the version of me they made up, I said. I want the people who told everyone I chose to disappear to have to sit in a room where I'm holding the document that says otherwise. He nodded slowly. I can arrange a room, he said. Vera died in April, a Tuesday, the kind of spring morning she would have been planning her garden against. She had been declining for 3 months, the vascular condition moving in stages that her care team described in careful language. I was with her the last week, sleeping in the family room chair, eating the cafeteria soup she had once made me and which was considerably worse. She was not in pain, which was the thing that mattered, and she knew I was there, which was the only other thing that mattered. The last clear thing she said to me was on a Thursday, when the April light was coming through the east window across the garden she could still see. She said, "Stand up straight. They couldn't ration you. Remember that." 3 days later she was gone. I handled the arrangements, because there were no arrangements to inherit. Vera had done it herself, as she had done everything. A small service at the church she had attended for 40 years. Flowers from the garden she had kept. A funeral lunch at a place she had designated, paid for, everything in order. My father came to the funeral. My mother, Caleb, arrived late and left early. My parents hugged me in the parking lot of the church with the warmth of people who had decided this moment was an opportunity. My mother held my hands and said she'd been thinking about me so much lately that losing Vera was a wake-up call, that life was too short for distance between family. I said I agreed. I did not say what I agreed about. My father cleared his throat and said that Vera had lived a good long life and left things tidy, which was his way of moving toward the subject of an estate before he could pretend he hadn't. Richard Fenn was managing Vera's estate, small, a house, a savings account, most of it going to the church garden fund she had designated and a little to me. But my parents didn't know what was in Vera's estate, and they didn't know what was in Vera's box, and I could see them working around the question the way you work around a thing you want, but can't ask for directly yet. 3 weeks later, my mother called. Her voice was warm as fresh bread. "Robert and I have been talking," she said. "We want to have everyone together. A family dinner. You, Caleb, some of your aunts and cousins. A fresh start. Will you come?" I took a breath. "I'll think about it," I said. "We love you, Lena. We've always loved you." She said it before she hung up, the first time in 11 years, and it landed on me like a coin tossed toward a stranger. I called Richard the next morning. He told me what I had already started to suspect. Caleb's company had recently gone through a difficult restructuring. He had investors and debts and a situation that required capital. My parents had co-signed for him 3 years ago on a significant sum. The startup had been struggling ever since. Vera's estate, by contrast, had a house in Briar Falls that was paid off and a location people had been asking about for years. "They want a piece of Vera's estate," I said. The dinner invitation, Richard said carefully, came 3 weeks after Vera's death, which also happens to be around the time they would have received the estate notification letter from the probate court showing them that they are not in Vera's will. There was a pause. "People don't get sentimental on a schedule," he said. "They get sentimental on a deadline." He told me he had already filed the trust claim with Lynn County, that we had a settlement meeting on the calendar, that the documentation was solid. He also told me something I needed to understand. The meeting was in 3 weeks. My parents had been notified. They had retained their own attorney and were preparing a counterclaim, that any disbursements from the Eleanor Hartley Trust had been made with the trust's proper interests in mind, that Caleb's education served the spirit of the trust, and that I had been voluntarily removed from family life and was therefore not in a position to claim hardship. "Voluntarily," I said. "That's their word." I was quiet for a moment. "Richard," I said, "my mother called me on the day of that dinner and told Vera she had packed my suitcase herself." He went very still. "I'm sorry. She did it in front of Vera. Vera was there when they drove me to Cedar Falls. She watched my mother put me in the car. And you have a witness." "I had a witness," I said. "She died in April. Did she leave anything about it in writing?" I thought about the letters. Eleanor's letters in the box. Vera's own handwriting on the back of one of them, a note she had added to a record she was keeping. The date. What she had observed. "Signed," I said. "Let me check the box again." I drove to the shop on a Sunday, when it was closed, and went went to the back room, where I keep the bolt ends and the pressing cloth and the things that aren't for customers. The box was on the shelf in the corner under a piece of linen I had put over it. I brought it to the work table under the good light. I had read the documents 3 times by then. I thought I knew everything in them. I didn't. In the bottom of the box, underneath the trust documents and the disbursement records and the letters, was a smaller envelope I had seen before but set aside because I thought it was blank. Vera's name was written on the front in her own handwriting, which is how you mark something to yourself, not to a recipient. Inside was a single sheet of paper, dense with her handwriting, dated the spring I had been brought to live with her. It was a record, Vera's record of the day my parents arrived, what they said, what they carried, what my mother told her in the kitchen while my father walked me upstairs. Linda said Lena had been unhappy in Cedar Falls. Vera had written that she'd been asking to leave, that a change would be good for her. She said it plainly, the way Linda says everything she has decided to believe. And then, in the next line, smaller, as though written at a different moment, I told her I would care for the child. I said nothing else, because there was nothing else to say that Linda would have heard. But I am writing this down, because lies need a witness even when they only have one. She had signed it with the date. Lies need a witness even when they only have one. I sat in the back room of my shop for a long time. Then I called Richard. He asked if it was dated and signed. I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. He said, Lena, your mother told Vera that you asked to leave. Vera recorded that she said it and that it was not true. That's a witnessed contemporary record of a misrepresentation that your parents have been using as their defense for 11 years. He let me hear what that meant. They've been preparing to walk into that meeting and tell a judge that you voluntarily left, that you weren't pushed out. They've been planning to do it in front of an attorney and a court record. And you have a signed document from the woman who was in the room when the story was invented. I looked at Vera's handwriting. It doesn't matter anymore that she's gone, I said. No, Richard said. It doesn't. She wrote it down. 2 days later, Caleb called. He had not called me in 11 years. His voice was careful in a way I did not recognize from the brother I had grown up with, stiff, rehearsed, the voice of someone who has been told what to say and is trying to say it convincingly. He said he had been thinking about our family, that losing Vera had been hard on everyone, that he hoped we could find a way to put things behind us. I asked him how the company was doing. A pause. It's been a challenging year. I asked if Mom and Dad were still co-signers on the loan. A longer pause. It's not about money, he said. It's about family. Caleb, I said, when I left home, did Mom tell you I asked to go? His silence had a shape, the shape of something he had been told a long time ago, and had never had reason to question. She said you were happier at Vera's, he said. She said you didn't want to be around. I was 13, I said. I came home from school and my suitcase was packed. Another silence. She told me you packed it yourself. I pressed my eyes shut for a moment. I didn't, I said. And Vera watched Mom put me in the car. He didn't say anything. There's a meeting on the 14th, I said. Richard Fenn's office in Cedar Falls. You don't have to come, but if you do, be prepared to answer honestly when someone asks what you remember. I hung up and stood in the back room of my shop with a bolt of ivory charmeuse in my hands that I'd been meaning to cut for 2 weeks. And I pressed my forehead against it for just a moment, the way you press your forehead against something cool when you need the world to stop moving. Then I went back to work. I press every seam before the next one. Vera taught me that you don't move forward until what's behind you is straight. If you're listening to this right now and thinking about one person who quietly kept a record for you, who wrote something down, so you'd have proof when the time came, go call them. I waited too long to properly thank Vera. Don't make my mistake. I'll be right here when you get back. The meeting was on a Thursday, 2 weeks before the trust claim would be formally entered into the court record. Richard had arranged it as a mediated settlement discussion, which meant both parties were represented. The goal was resolution before litigation, and everything said could be used in the formal proceeding if it came to that. He had told me what this meant in plain language. Go in calm, let the paper do the work, and say as little as possible until the paper has been read. I dressed the way I dress for difficult fittings, simply, pressed, nothing that needed explanation. I brought the folder in a plain leather portfolio that I kept on the shop counter for client contracts. My parents were already seated when I walked in. My mother, across the table, in the kind of careful blouse that says this is serious, but I am composed. My father beside her, jaw set, hands flat on the table. Their attorney, a man named Grier, Greer, who wore a pocket square and the confident expression of someone who has not yet read the documents on the other side of the table. Caleb was there. He had come. He sat at the far end, not beside our parents, not beside me, in the middle distance of a man who had not yet decided whose version he believed. Richard opened the meeting, and my mother didn't wait for her turn. She told the room I had inserted myself into Vera's life in the final years, that I had isolated her from family, that the trust claim was a money grab from a daughter who had walked away from her family at 13 and was now trying to profit from a woman's death. She said it in the soft, certain voice. I waited for her to finish. Then Richard nodded to me, and I opened the portfolio and laid the first document on the table. This is the Eleanor Ruth Hartley Educational Trust, I said, filed with Lynn County Probate in the year of my grandmother's death. I am the sole named beneficiary. The trust language specifies educational purposes, starting at the time of my enrollment in secondary school. I slid it to the center where everyone could read it. This is the disbursement record. I laid it beside the first. Over 4 years, every dollar in that trust was disbursed. None of it to the named beneficiary. My mother's attorney started to speak. Richard raised one hand without looking at him. I laid the third document. This is a record of where the disbursements went. Tuition, fees, program costs, all under Caleb Hartley's name, including the private university tuition during the years I was attending a state technical program on loans I am still repaying. I looked at the table for a moment. I don't say this to attack my brother. I looked at Caleb. He was 17. He didn't know whose money that was. The person who knew was the trust's named executor. I looked at my father. He was very still. My mother opened her mouth. Her voice had the very beginning of the script she had been running for 11 years. You chose to go to Vera. You asked to. I'd like to address that, I said. I took the fourth document out of the portfolio. This is a contemporaneous record written by Vera Marlowe in the spring that I came to live with her. It is dated and signed. Vera was present when my mother arrived with my packed belongings. She recorded what my mother told her that day, that I had been unhappy and had asked to leave. I set it on the table. Vera then noted, in her own hand, that this was not true, that she observed me being brought to her house by my parents, that no child who asks to leave packs nothing and takes nothing and says nothing and watches a car drive away. I let the room read it. My mother's face had gone very still, the stillness of someone watching the story they have been telling stop fitting the available facts. Vera wrote this in case anyone needed a witness, I said. She knew someone would need a witness eventually. She spent 11 years keeping this in a box, so I'd have it when the time came. Greer, my parents' attorney, said something quietly to my father. My father's jaw tightened. What I'm laying out today, I said, isn't a grievance list. It's a factual record. Money set aside by my grandmother for my education was redirected without my knowledge. The reason given for my removal from my family's home was fabricated. I have documentation of both. Richard will be entering these into the formal record next week. I looked at my mother. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I said. And I meant it, which surprised me. I'm doing it because for 11 years the story in this family has been that I'm the one who left. And I need that story to stop. Not just for me. For the record. My mother's composure had cracked at the edge, a small fracture. She looked at Vera's document the way you look at something you didn't think still existed. Then my father did what my father always did when a logical argument collapsed. He went back to the logic. We made the best decisions we could with limited resources, he said. Caleb had potential that required investment. Every dollar in that trust went to something that benefited the family. He said it like a reasonable man explaining a balance sheet. Caleb's name wasn't on the trust, Dad, I said quietly. Mine was, he said. You would have spent it on a sewing shop. The room went very still. He had said it as a dismissal, the way you dismiss a bad investment. As if the life I had built, the shop, the customers, the wedding dresses that existed because some woman trusted me with the most important day she had, was the proof that I hadn't been worth the investment. I looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, with the specific clarity you get when you finally hear the thing that has been true your whole life said said out loud by the person who thought it. You're right, I said. I would have spent it on a sewing shop, and it would have been mine. Caleb made a sound at the end of the table, small and sharp, like something had caught in his throat. He put his phone face down on the table and looked at my father. And then he said the thing that told me the ground had shifted. Dad, her name was on the trust. My father looked at him. Her name was on the trust, Caleb said again, and you spent it. You can't argue around that. I didn't know the money was hers. But you did. My mother said his name in the warning voice. The same voice I remembered from the hallway. The voice that ended arguments. Caleb looked at her. You told me she packed her own suitcase, he said. You told me she wanted to go. My mother straightened. Caleb, we can discuss this. Vera signed a piece of paper that says you told her the same thing and it wasn't true. He picked up the document. Read it again. Set it down. You made me think she left because she didn't love us. I've believed that my whole life. The room had the quality of a seam that has pulled apart. You can see where it used to hold. Greer leaned toward my parents and said something I couldn't hear. My mother looked at the table. My father looked at his hands. I sat very still and let the paper do what Vera had kept it to do. The formal claim settled 6 weeks later. My parents' attorney had reviewed the documentation and advised against a court challenge, citing the trust language, the disbursement records, and, I imagine in the most private terms, the signed record from a dead woman who had taken the trouble to write down a lie while it was still fresh. The settlement included a restitution figure for the redirected trust funds, reduced from the full original amount, because the years had passed and a judge would have looked at the age of the claim and the complexity of establishing exact damages, and Richard believed the reduced figure was achievable where the full one might drag. He laid it out for me plainly and let me decide. I decided yes, not because the number was everything I had wanted, because it was real, and documented, and mine, and because my name was on the settlement the same way it had been on the trust document, which meant it existed in the public record where no one could rewrite it. My parents paid it in 2 installments, which told me they had it, or could find it, and had simply been choosing not to. I did not hear from them after that. A card came once, from my mother, 9 weeks after the settlement. Short, no return address, the handwriting tighter than usual. She said she hoped I was well. She said she hoped someday we could find a way forward. She said she was sorry for any pain, like it had been weather that passed through, impersonal and unownable. I read it twice. I set it in the wooden box on the shelf. Not out of hope, out of habit. I keep records. Caleb called me 2 weeks after the meeting. He didn't start with an apology, which surprised me, and then didn't surprise me, because we are twins and I know how he thinks. He starts with facts. He said, I went back through the years I was in school, the camp, the tuition. I've been trying to figure out what I would have known and when I would have known it. I waited. I wouldn't have known, he said. I was 17 and they handled the money. I didn't think about where it came from. I know, I said, but I should have, he said. I should have asked. I was old enough. We were quiet together for a moment, the particular quiet of 2 people who shared a beginning and were only now figuring out that the middle had been told to them incorrectly. He said, Mom told me about the suitcase, that you asked to go. I never questioned it. She told you what she needed you to believe, I said, so you wouldn't ask harder questions. He absorbed that. I don't know how to fix it, he said. You can't fix it, I said. It's over. What you can do is decide what the relationship looks like going forward, if there is one. He asked me what I wanted. I thought about Vera sitting at her own kitchen table writing down a lie she had witnessed because she believed evidence outlasted memory. I thought about the trust document with my name on it. I thought about thread and seams and the fact that you press every seam before the next one. I want honesty, I said. I want a brother who doesn't carry someone else's version of me. And I want to go slowly because I don't know you and you don't know me. And we're going to have to build that from scratch. He said, okay, that word, 1 syllable, the most open-ended thing he had said to me in 11 years. We have been building slowly since. Phone calls, not often, but real. He came to the shop once in the fall and sat in the consultation chair I keep for clients and watched me pin a hem for an hour without saying much. When he left he said, you're very good at this, not as a consolation, just as an observation, the way you know to fact. I said thank you. He nodded and left, and I finished the hem, and I thought about what it means to be seen accurately by someone who shares your blood. It felt strange and good and fragile, like the first fitting of a dress that is almost but not quite finished. The shop is doing well. I hired an assistant named Trisha, who does the alterations on weekdays while I work on the custom pieces, and together we have a waiting list that I am quietly proud of. I bought the building last fall, which is a thing that would not have happened without the settlement, and also would not have happened without 11 years of working towards something, because it was what I had instead of anything else. The wooden box is on the shelf in the back room, between the bolt ends and the pressing cloth. I have not taken everything out of it again. I know what's in it. I don't need to read it to keep it. Vera's note is in there. Her handwriting, the date, the line that I have memorized, because it is the most precise thing anyone has ever said about what I needed. Lies need a witness even when they only have one. She was the witness. The box is the record, and I am, finally, the person the record was always for. Here is what I know now. My parents made a decision about me before I was old enough to consent to it or argue against it. They made it in the language of investment and resource allocation and odds, as though a child were a futures contract. And they were so committed to that logic that even in a conference room in Cedar Falls with a signed document in front of them, my father's first instinct was to explain the reasoning, as though the reasoning changed the deed. You can spend your whole life building the argument that someone's logic was wrong, or you can build something with your hands and let the record speak. I chose the second thing. Not bravely, not heroically, because sewing is the thing I know how to do, and the shop is the thing I had to work with, and working is what I had instead of a family while I was building one. The settlement didn't give me back the years. No number does that. What it gave me was a closing line on the version of the story where I was the one who left. That version is closed. What replaces it is this: a girl who came home from school to a suitcase by the back door, who went to a woman who made soup and pressed seams and wrote things down, who built a life with borrowed equipment and her own two hands and never once asked the people who decided she wasn't the better odds to weigh in on how it turned out. They don't get to weigh in. The work is the answer. The box is the record. And Vera, who chose me when no one had to choose anyone, was right about everything she ever said. Stand up straight. They couldn't ration you. I remember. That's my story. A suitcase by the back door. A box on a shelf. And a woman who spent 11 years waiting for me to be ready to open it. If you've been called the one they could spare, the overhead, the long shot, the child not worth the full investment, you were not. They were just bad at counting what mattered. Drop the word box in the comments if someone in your life has quietly been keeping a record for you. I want to know. I read every single one. And if someone you love needs to hear today that being depended on and being discarded are not the same thing as being wrong, share this with them right now. Subscribe to Sweet Payback Stories. One quiet story every week. The kind that stays with you. I'll see you at the next table.